Let me tell you what actually happened in Berea today, because I guarantee you most of you are going to hear about this through somebody else's filter, and by the time it reaches your feed, it's going to sound nothing like what was actually said in that room. So before this gets twisted any further out there, I want to walk you through it myself, straight from the source, no spin attached. This is about the Browns quarterback competition, and honestly, the gap between what actually got said today and what's been getting repeated about that quarterback room since April is starting to feel like two entirely separate stories that just happen to share the same headline. Here's what you need to understand before we go any further. Since the spring, there's been this neat packaged narrative running underneath basically every single update coming out of that building. One guy out front, one guy playing catch-up. It's funny, because it didn't even matter who was cast in which role at any given moment. Earlier in the offseason, that framing had Joe Flacco out in front, and once Deshaun Watson became the center of the story instead, the shape of the narrative never actually shifted. Somebody's leading, somebody's trailing, and the whole competition is basically already decided before a single pad has popped. It's a clean story. It's an easy story. It's the kind of story that gets shared and clipped and repeated 1,000 times. The only problem is, nobody who actually has a say in that quarterback room has ever once said anything close to that. Today, Todd Monkin stood at that podium and got hit with a direct, no room to dodge question. Was he going to name a starter before training camp even opened? And he didn't do the usual coach speak dance where he talks for 90 seconds and says absolutely nothing of substance. He said no, flat out. And then he told everybody exactly why. And it wasn't some soft, diplomatic line about a rookie needing more reps to get caught up. What he actually said was that both of his quarterbacks have shown him enough this offseason that he trusts either one of them to go out and win him football games. Sit with that word for a second, both. That single word completely flips the entire script you've probably been fed for the last 2 months. He's not describing a clear-cut starter and a developmental project limping along behind him. He's describing two players his own coaching staff genuinely believes can start in this league, right now, today. That's the real reason there's no decision yet. It's not because somebody's behind, it's because naming a guy too early would be the actual mistake here. Think about what it means when a coach like Monken says something like that. This isn't a guy who's softening the blow for a rookie because he feels sympathetic. This is a coach who's broken down every single throw on tape, who stands on that practice field with his own eyes locked on every single rep, and who's looking at two legitimately viable options, instead of pretending he has certainty he doesn't actually have. And once you hear him say it in those exact words, it becomes really hard to square that with the version of this story that's been sold to Browns fans for 2.5 months straight. Now let's slow down on how he handled that question, because this is where it gets genuinely interesting. He had a wide open lane to throw a bone to everybody who's been insisting Watson's clearly the guy. All he had to do was nod in that direction, even subtly. He didn't take it. What he said instead was that the only version of this where walking into camp without a named starter becomes a real problem is if he didn't trust either of these guys to go win him games. Flip that sentence over in your head for a second, because it's not what it sounds like on the surface. That's not him expressing doubt about Shedeur Sanders. That's him expressing full confidence in both quarterbacks at the same time. He's telling you, directly, that the hesitation isn't a red flag at all. The hesitation is proof that this thing is a lot closer than the outside narrative wants anybody to believe. So here's the question I think everybody needs to be asking right now. How does a quote that direct, that clearly on the record, somehow get twisted into, yeah, Watson's basically got this thing locked up, it's pretty much decided? Because I went back and actually checked, and I can tell you exactly how that happened. A huge chunk of the coverage coming out of Cleveland built its entire spring storyline around one narrow window of time, voluntary work, back in April. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that early read was fabricated. It wasn't. Watson, with real NFL snaps under his belt, comfortable operating inside a pro-style system, just carrying the experience that comes from actually having played quarterback at this level. He looked sharper in those early sessions. That part is genuinely true. I'm not denying it. But here's where the whole thing falls apart for anybody who just kept riding that April snapshot all the way through June like nothing ever changed. Football does not sit still. It never has. While that early gap was real, Sanders didn't just accept it and coast along behind it, he attacked it. By the time minicamp rolled around, that separation had visibly tightened, and I'm not talking about some vague, trust me kind of claim here. I mean visibly, on camera, in live drills, with reporters physically standing there watching it happen in real time. His first day of minicamp was sharp, and from there he just kept stacking good days on top of good days. And here's the part almost nobody wants to say out loud with any real honesty. The same reporters who spent weeks hyping up Watson's early head start turned right around, in that same breath, and gave Sanders credit by name for closing that exact gap. You cannot praise a guy for cutting into a lead while simultaneously telling your audience that the lead doesn't exist anymore. Those two claims directly contradict each other, and somehow both got broadcast like nobody noticed the conflict. Now, credit where it's actually due, because not every outlet covering this handled it the same lazy way. One reporter, and I'll give her this one, came right out and said plainly that Sanders has turned this into a real, legitimate competition, that you have to respect a guy who refused to get written off after a rough rookie season. That's at least an honest attempt at fairness, even if the broader framing around her comments still leaned toward Watson overall. But there's another corner of this coverage that didn't extend Sanders that same basic courtesy. What we got from that side instead was something closer to ventriloquism, putting words into people's mouths they never actually said. Conclusions attached to Monken that Monken never reached. Conclusions hung on general manager Andrew Berry that Berry never voiced. Conclusions slapped onto the quarterback's coach that, when you actually go back and listen to the tape word for word, point in the exact opposite direction of what got reported to the public. And this next part, I really need you locked in here, because watching how far this drifted from the original comments is almost theatrical. The quarterback's coach got asked a completely open, unloaded question about how this competition has been developing. And what he actually talked about was Sanders cleaning up his footwork. He talked about him absorbing the install piece by piece, actually mastering the offense instead of just memorizing it on paper. He said it's been genuinely enjoyable watching him grow, that his processing has visibly sped up, that his feet are finally starting to catch up with how fast his mind already operates. He even brought up Sanders' college tape completely unprompted, specifically pointing toward those off-schedule plays, the way he extends a broken pocket and somehow manufactures something out of nothing, and made the point himself that no workout drill, no pro day number, none of that ever captured how fast this guy actually thinks and moves once the ball is live in his hands. Now take all of that, specific, detailed, genuinely glowing, and try explaining to me how anybody walks away from it and lands on, well, they clearly think Watson handles pressure better right now. Because that's the exact conclusion that got handed to the audience. Not floated as a guess, not framed as a theory. Delivered flat, like fact, like somebody had a private conversation inside that building and was simply relaying it straight to you. And when you actually go back to the real source, which I always do because I refuse to operate off vibes and somebody else's secondhand summary, there's nothing in that quote supporting that claim. Nothing implied. No hidden code language you have to squint to find. It's a completely separate, invented claim, dressed up with just enough false confidence that it reads like insider knowledge instead of what it actually is, which is fiction. And I get why it happens. I genuinely do. There's an entire ecosystem built around sounding like you've got the inside track, around refusing to walk back a take you committed to back in April, even after May and June completely stopped cooperating with it. But when the real, on-record answer is about footwork reps and processing speed and visible growth, and what gets broadcast to thousands of people is the veterans clearly more trusted in chaos. That's not analysis anymore. That's fabrication wearing analysis as a disguise. And fabricated narratives carry real consequences, because the fans who never bother checking the actual transcript walk away genuinely convinced this is already decided, while the people who actually run that organization are standing right there on camera, telling you, in plain language, that it isn't. There's one more layer here that might matter even more than the quarterback's coach's comments, and that's Andrew Berry. When he got asked directly about Sanders' development, he didn't give one of those safe, hedge everything, offend nobody answers. He talked about an excellent spring. Full stop, no qualifiers attached. He zeroed in specifically on the previous 8 to 10 weeks, and then he widened that lens all the way back across the past 6 months, back to January and February, which tells you this isn't some hot streak that conveniently lined up with a press conference. This is a sustained, deliberate growth arc the front office has been tracking the entire time, quietly, in the background, while everybody outside the building was busy arguing over April snapshots. He talked about the natural adjustment every rookie quarterback has to go through, especially one who barely played close to a full season. The part where you catch your breath, take honest inventory of what's actually broken in your game, and go fix it with real intention instead of just hoping it improves on its own. And the actual word he used, on the record, attached to his name as the general manager of this entire football operation, was phenomenal. Not encouraging, not promising considering where he started. Phenomenal. That's about as close to a primary source on internal evaluation as you're realistically ever going to get. And that is not the language of a front office quietly preparing to let a guy down easy come August. So now line all three of these up side by side and just sit with it for a second. Monken's words, the quarterback's coach's words, Berry's words. 3 completely different roles, 3 different moments, 3 different microphones, and every single one of them lands in roughly the same place. So if the actual people running this competition are this aligned, this consistent in what they're saying publicly, where exactly did the "Watson's already got this thing locked up" version of events even come from? Because it sure didn't come from inside that building. It came from outside it, repeated over and over with enough swagger that a lot of fans eventually started treating speculation like settled fact. Now, to be completely fair across the board, I'm not standing here telling you Sanders is some finished product, because he isn't, and nobody serious inside that building is claiming that either. He's still got real things to clean up. Getting the ball out on time the moment real pressure shows up, that's still very much a work in progress for him, and that's not me being harsh. That's just an honest read of where he currently sits. Even his strongest defenders in that media room would tell you the same thing without blinking. And on the other side, Watson brings years of experience nobody can reasonably argue against, but he's had his own stretches this spring where his processing wasn't exactly lightning fast either. Neither one of these guys is a finished product right now, and that's precisely why nobody with actual decision-making power over this roster is racing to crown a winner before camp even opens. The fact that this competition is still openly, genuinely happening, without somebody forcing a premature conclusion onto it, might honestly be the most refreshing thing about this entire story. And the deeper you actually dig into what each guy is specifically working through, the more compelling this whole situation becomes. Watson's issue right now isn't arm talent. It isn't physical tools. At this point in his career, it's about trusting what his eyes are telling him fast enough under live pressure, instead of holding on to the ball that extra half second while the pocket is already caving in around him. That's a veteran's problem, and it tends to show up specifically once the lights come on and the game starts moving faster than any walkthrough could ever simulate. Sanders' challenge runs in almost the opposite direction. It's less about pre-snap reads and more about building that internal clock that only comes from real reps. Knowing exactly when to climb the pocket, when to throw a guy open before the window even appears, when to just throw the ball away instead of trying to manufacture magic out of a play that's already dead. 2 completely different problems. Neither one disqualifies either guy from being a legitimate NFL starter. They're just sitting at different points on the exact same learning curve. That, to me, is what actually makes this whole situation worth paying attention to once you strip away all the manufactured certainty surrounding it. On one side, you've got a veteran who knows the language of the offense inside and out, knows how to operate within structure, but who's shown real hesitation the moment pressure actually shows up in his face. On the other side, you've got a rookie still building the foundational habits required to play this position at the highest level, but who's flashed an instinctive, off-schedule playmaking gift that you simply cannot coach into somebody who doesn't already have it inside them. If I'm sitting in Monken's chair watching both of these guys grind every single day, I don't think there's a comfortable, obvious answer sitting right there waiting for him. And if there genuinely isn't one, the only honest move left is exactly what he's doing right now. Let the pads go on, let live contact and real game speed settle this the way it's actually supposed to get settled, and stop letting some press conference soundbite get rushed along by a deadline a reporter invented back in April. And speaking of that invented deadline, let's actually talk about the goalpost moving here, because this part deserves its own spotlight. For weeks, certain corners of Browns media insisted this competition absolutely had to be resolved before training camp opened. That was the line in the sand. That was the self-imposed deadline everybody kept repeating with total confidence. And once that deadline came and went with nothing actually decided, instead of anybody admitting the deadline itself was the problem, the entire story just quietly shifted shape underneath everybody's nose. Suddenly, the new line became, well, it'll get sorted out quickly once camp actually kicks off. Same vague sense of urgency, brand new finish line, conveniently relocated the exact moment the old one failed to deliver. If you set a hard deadline because you're confident in your own prediction and that deadline sails right past you with nothing to show for it, the honest move is admitting your timing was off. What actually happened instead was quietly sliding the goalposts further down the field and hoping nobody was paying close enough attention to notice the move. And there's some real context worth being upfront about here too, because this isn't the first time Cleveland's coaching decisions and Cleveland's media coverage of Shedeur Sanders have been completely out of step with each other. Go all the way back to when he first walked into that building as a rookie. The previous head coach wasn't exactly sold on bringing him in to begin with, and that hesitation at the very top of the organization trickled all the way down into how the local coverage treated him from day one. When the guy calling the plays doesn't fully believe in a player, it becomes a lot easier for everybody covering that team to treat every mistake as confirmation and every flash of good play as some kind of fluke. That's not some conspiracy theory I'm spinning up for you. That's just how organizational tone actually works in this league. It sets the temperature for everything written and said underneath it. But that's not where things stand anymore, and I think that distinction matters enormously. The temperature in that building has completely changed. The current coaching staff has been, by every visible measure available to us, genuinely invested in Sanders' growth, and not in some performative, say the right thing for the cameras kind of way, but in the specific, detailed, here's exactly what I'm seeing change in his footwork and his processing kind of way that only comes from a coach who's actually locked in and paying real attention. Pair that with a general manager openly using a word like phenomenal in front of every camera in that room, and a locker room that, by every outward appearance, has fully embraced both this player and everything surrounding him. That is a fundamentally different environment than the one he stepped into as a rookie a year ago. And inside an environment like that, it becomes a lot harder to manufacture a failing narrative from the outside, because the people closest to the actual situation keep contradicting it, on the record, in their own words, every single time somebody tries. So where does all of this actually leave us heading into camp? Here's my honest read, completely stripped of the noise. This competition is nowhere close to decided, and anyone telling you otherwise right now is either guessing or trying to sell you something. What we actually know, based on what was said today and not what's been repeated about today, is that the real gap from April, built entirely on Watson's experience advantage, has been steadily shrinking ever since Sanders started putting in the work. We know every single person with genuine decision-making power over this roster has used language pointing toward a real, open, undecided competition, not a coronation dressed up as suspense for ratings. We know the original deadline this was all supposed to be wrapped up by has already come and gone, and the goalposts have already been quietly relocated to cover for it. And we know that once camp opens at the end of July and the pads finally go on for real, every bit of off-season talk, mine included, right now, in this very video, gets tested against live, physical, full-speed football. That's the only place this actually gets decided. Not a press conference, not a mini-camp walkthrough. and definitely not somebody's confident-sounding guess dressed up as what a coach really meant underneath the words he actually used. So here's what I want to leave you with before we wrap this one up. Pay close attention going forward to who's actually quoting the people inside that building word for word, and who's quoting their own interpretation of what those people supposedly meant beneath the surface. That difference is going to matter more and more as we get closer to camp, because this story isn't finished. It's just entering the stretch where the noise gets louder and the actual signal gets a lot harder to find underneath all of it. I'm going to keep tracking every piece of this as camp approaches, and I'm going to keep going straight back to the real transcripts every single time, because that's still the only honest way any of us actually find out what's true in a situation like this.